was eerily quiet. And then my mind was kind of like, the head in the fishbowl.
Then it takes me into the bathroom and says, this is how you brush your teeth. Brush, rinse, repeat. Brush, rinse, repeat. Brush, rinse, repeat.
But there were 2 girls, and it was like, you'll have to give us a ride. You can't fill us, no. You can't refuse us. He'll let us in his car.
The thoughts were all alone in this empty void. The head in the fishbowl.
This doesn't look right. They got close enough where he said he could see, their eyes and how intelligent they seem. This doesn't look right.
These gremlin-type creatures.
This doesn't look right.
No pupils, no iris. 3 fingers. 3 long fingers. And this is when the mental torture.
And then it was eerily quiet.
All right, guys. We're back on Conspirinormal. And we just had an awesome party the other night. Rob's still recovering from it.
Yeah, the hangover's starting to fade. It took a couple days for this one. It was pretty fierce.
This was a mixture of green beer and Evan Williams, correct?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the Evan Williams. It was Guinness. I wasn't drinking the green beer. I was
You
drinking
didn't drink
Guinness.
any of the green beer?
Nope.
Which is really just PBR with green dye, right?
But I drank like 8 tall boy Guinnesses. I think they were like pints. And
8
16
of them?
ounces. Yeah.
Man, I didn't realize you drank that much.
And I was helping Lukey with his Evan Williams. Yeah. I passed out sitting right here in this very chair. The party surrounding me.
Yes, you did. And Alyssa was like, come help me with this stuff. We got to get this stuff inside.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And then later on, you passed out on the easy chair, and she was trying to get you to go to bed, and you were just like a zombie or something. You're just like,
oh, I don't remember that at all.
complete and total blackout.
I just stop off for a nap in the chair on the way to bed.
It's amazing how I don't think I've ever been blackout drunk. I don't think it's ever actually happened to me. Maybe it's either because I just can't get that way, or maybe it just I don't drink enough. But
I don't get that way very often. This was not something that I'm necessarily proud of, but it happened.
And we also hope that there might be a change in the sound quality.
Well, I'll definitely sound more relaxed than I was last week.
Yes.
And that would be because we have a ceiling, thanks to Adam and our good friend Patrick.
Yes. Yes, we do have a ceiling, a drywalled ceiling now. There's still a few little patches that need to be filled, but
yeah,
for the most part.
Yeah, we're going to do the walls too, so I'll get those when I do the walls.
So you seeing any difference in acoustics in here? Or?
It's actually, it's a little more reflective. Like if you clap really loud, it's like, you hear the little slap back, but but it's all going to, there's still a lot more work to do. I'm just glad that we won't hear the squirrels anymore.
Well, you actually had something interesting happen to you to do with squirrels.
Yeah, I was tearing the last little bit of the old insulation out. It was Tuesday morning. We'd been going for like 3 days straight, and I was out here like I was exhausted, and it was 8 o'clock in the morning. I had my morning cup of coffee, and I pulled it out of the ceiling, and a dead squirrel fell out with its claws like perfectly positioned out in front of it to snag my hoodie on its way to the floor. So it was like this little zombie squirrel staring up at me.
Yeah, you sent me a picture, and I had just woken up, and
It was one of those moments that's like so shocking and horrific that like you lose focus on reality for a second, and you don't really fully understand what's going on.
Like, what the hell is that thing?
Yeah.
So had Squirrely been? Had he been scampering up and down? Had we heard him before?
Oh, I'm sure he's been on a few recordings. Yeah, and I don't know how he got in there because I cut down all the branches that like were close to the building. Maybe he was up there when I cut the branches and he couldn't get back down to the ground.
So you just starved to death?
It seems like a squirrel would figure out a way to scamper down the wall or something.
Yeah, well, you would think, but I don't know how smart they are, honestly. But yeah, it was a chore. I mean, you still got some things to do, but I think the most better part of it is done for sure.
The temperature is definitely nicer out here.
Yeah. Yeah. Not as drafty. I mean, compared to like what it was when we first got in here.
When it was a garage instead of a studio.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you had the garage door We don't have that anymore. Those you have the actual doors, and
real light fixtures in the ceiling.
Yeah, there's real light fixtures in the ceiling, which look very good, by the way.
Thank you.
We need to take some pictures and put them up on the website or on the Facebook page. We should definitely do that, because probably nobody can really understand what we're talking about until we actually. It makes really good radio, guys.
We're happy about it.
We're happy about it. It's an achievement. Slowly but surely, the studio is coming along. Rob's gathering his empire in here. Tonight, guys, we have Zack Hunt going to be on the show. Zack is a local Nashvilleian, just as we are. And we're going to talk about, well, he has a blog called ZackHunt.com, which used to be called AmericanJesus.com. And which I don't know if that is a allusion to the Bad Religion song or not. But we are going to talk a little bit about basically some of the same kind of stuff we talked about with Dr. Future. Talking about the evangelicals and how much they love Trump, what their attitudes are, and maybe like just a better way of looking at Christianity, so that it's not beholden to, basically the Republican Party and quote unquote conservatism. And how do you feel about that, Rob?
Well, I'm glad there's people out there doing that. I mean, I'm not set in any one religion. I'm just a very free, open-minded kind of guy, and I separation of church and state is just vastly important to me, and I think it should be important to everybody, because we don't, that leads to just tyranny. That's all it can lead to.
Yeah, eventually. But we hear so much about. I don't know. I really want to get into him about this. So let's take a break here, and we will be right back with Zack Hunt on Conspirinormal.
What if I were to tell you that the forms are not the facts? And what if I were to ask you the shape of water? Water is in a state of constant flow and flux, a paradox of weakness and strength. My name is Aaron David, and I am host of Charm the Water, a weekly podcast centering on the occult and mysticism, based in Asheville, North Carolina. You can find us at charmthewater.com or iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, your favorite pod feeder. Come holler.
Hey guys, we are back on Conspirinormal after that little nice brief intro discussing our new studio and St. Patrick's Day parties and the like. But we do have the guest here with us, and that is Mr. Zack Hunt, who is a fellow Nashvilleian. Hello, Zack. Welcome to Conspirinormal. Have actually followed you for a long time, as I think I told you as we were talking, but followed your blog for maybe 6-7 years now, I'd say.
Well, what you didn't know is I've been secretly following you as well. I have tracking software that follows my readers.
Right. You've got in our smart TVs that we have here in the studio, right?
Well, I'm actually more of a microwave surveillance kind of guy.
Do you know what he's referring to there, Rob? The surveillance in the microwave?
Vaguely, yeah. I don't know the details behind the story.
Yes, Carrie Ann Conway said that they can watch us in microwaves. You never know. Who
knows these days? I mean, literally, you cannot know the truth anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're unique as well, Zack, because you're a fellow Nashvilleian. And
indeed. Back home and glad to be here.
Yeah, I noticed that you were in Connecticut for a while.
Yeah. My wife did her OBGYN residency at UConn, and I did graduate school at Yale, and then took care of a 1-year-old. Well, now she's 3-year-old for a while, and then we had another one. So I did a lot of changing diapers and making bottles. I feel like I'm quite the expert in that field. So if you guys want to talk about that, you just let me know.
Did they let you join Skull and Bones while you were up there?
I actually had a class right across the street from the tomb, and I never so the door was open one time And I tried to like peek in, and you can't see anything. So like the door opens to a wall, and it goes like left to right, and you can't really see anything. Like there's articles and stuff up there, and like some students a while back snuck in, but I only saw one person going in, and like especially if you saw the movie Skulls or the Skulls or whatever with is it Joshua Jackson.
Yeah.
So I have random pop culture knowledge that's completely useless in life.
Well,
like
don't we all?
When you watch that movie and you think that like everybody in Skull and Bones is, this super cool jock, uber rich people. And maybe there are some of those people, but the only person I ever saw in there was this scrawny looking nerdy dude that like might have been directly out of Revenge of the Nerds. Like it was not the caricature, George W. Bush type person that's, super smart and manly. But yeah, it was cool. There was one Facebook post, like somebody hacked somebody's Facebook account and posted a bunch of pictures from a Skull and Bones party that they had. And it was out on there in the movie, there's that island that they go to, and they do have an island. And that's where this party was going on. But like the place is a dump. Like it's just this old rickety house from, like the 60s or 70s that's run down. And the pictures were a bunch of like nerdy college kids drinking beer. Like there was nothing exciting or mysterious or I don't know. It took all the mystery out of it.
You didn't see Geronimo's skull in one of the pictures?
Supposedly it's there, but no, they kept that out of sight.
Yeah. That's an interesting history. You'll never know what exactly is going on. Interesting that you mentioned an island, because in our last episode, our guest mentioned this like island somewhere in Michigan that is supposedly owned by the Freemasons, and they won't let anybody on it. Just as an aside. But we did mention Yale there, but I want to talk about your background, kind of your educational background, because let's establish that, because you are not a lightweight when it comes to theology, sir.
I call myself more of a middle featherweight. How's that?
I gotcha. Okay.
I don't want to put myself up there with the real heavyweights of the world, because they'll call me out and they'll send me text messages and hateful Twitter tweets and be like, "You don't have a PhD." I'm like, "That's true. I do not have a PhD."
Well, you're pretty close.
That's true. I've spent more time and accumulated more student loan debt than I would like to admit.
Mm-hmm. Haven't we all, sir? Haven't we all? But you have what is your educational background? So, an undergraduate, I was indecisive, so I double majored in religious studies and history, political science. And thought I was going to be a youth pastor coming in, and then decided I didn't want to do that. So I tried to go the pre-law track, and then decided I didn't want to do that, and ended up a youth pastor again. Went to youth ministry and ended up going back to school and getting a master's in theological studies, and continued in youth ministry for a couple of years. And like I said, 5 years ago now, my wife matched for her residency in Connecticut, and we tried to line that up so that she could go to school and I could go to school too. And it just happened that we ended up in Connecticut. So she went to UConn and I got to go to Yale Divinity School for a couple of years and majored in history of Christianity. It was awesome. I had a good time. It was a really cool experience. So that was like a separate degree, basically, like a separate undergraduate degree or a graduate degree?
The history of Christianity?
Yeah.
That was graduate.
Okay.
So it was a master's degree. So
you did your first year undergraduate. Was that here at Trevecca?
Yeah. The undergraduate and the first master's were both here at Trevecca in good old Nashville, Tennessee.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I know it well. Know Trevecca pretty well. Actually, our friend Dr. Futurequake, they used to play, the radio station at Trevecca used to play Futurequake during the afternoons. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Very cool.
Yep. Highly regarded as someone you need to meet sometime, sir. So, but Futurequake, our good friend Doc Future, who's been on the show several times.
Interesting. What a small world. Yeah, you would appreciate it. Like I run into old Trevecca people or random Trevecca people everywhere I go. I was in Savannah last weekend and we went on a ghost tour.
Yeah.
And it was cool. It was neat. I mean, for nothing else, and we didn't see anything obviously. But it was the history of it, the stories were cool. But there was a team of professional ghost hunters with us, and so I got to talking to one of them, and I was telling her about, because there's a couple ghost stories that we have from Tribeca, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I know Tribeca. I did my master's there." I was like, "What?" So we're kind of infectious that way. Tribeca folks kind of show up everywhere.
Yeah, I had never heard of it before I actually moved to Nashville.
Yeah,
but apparently it's a very well known school.
It's crazy. We get places, man.
Now, did you grow up in the Nazarene church?
I did. I am a fourth generation Nazarene. My wife is a fifth generation. Her second uncle or something like that helped found the denomination, believe it or not.
Now, where would you put the Nazarenes on a spectrum of conservative to liberal? Where would you put them?
We have a bit of a split personality disorder in our denomination, theologically speaking. So if you were to go to an average Nazarene church or know an average Nazarene person, which would not be me, we tend to be socially conservative. I mean, across the board, pretty socially conservative. And so a lot of old Nazarene jokes, if you were to go back to the founding of the denomination, Nazarenes didn't wear jewelry, including wedding rings, because it was considered too ostentatious. Mm-hmm. Women certainly didn't wear pants. We didn't go to movies. We didn't drink. We didn't play cards. We didn't dance. So a lot of fun, obviously, in those early days. A lot of those things have changed. The denomination officially is still teetotalers, although, if you go to Europe, that is different, especially in the country like Germany. But yeah, so they would, everyday Nazarene would fall on the conservative evangelical side of things. But on paper, if you look at our official articles of faith, the denomination has some pretty progressive stances. We've been ordained relative to the rest of conservative evangelicalism. So we've been ordaining women since our founding, although we certainly need to do a better job of getting them jobs. We do not believe in the total inerrancy of Scripture, meaning that we believe the way we articulate it is that the Bible is inerrant in all things pertaining to salvation, or something like that. So we believe the Bible perfectly reveals the path to salvation, I guess, but is not a perfect text in and of itself. We don't believe it's a science book or a history book, in those sort of literal senses. And so we also don't believe, or the better way to put it is we are open to interpretation on the idea of creation. And so you do have some Nazarenes who are pretty staunchly Ken Ham fans. And then you've got some Nazarenes who are pretty staunchly in the evolution camp as well. We don't take a position on end times kind of stuff. That's sort of opened up as well. So there's a lot of things that on paper, at least, we are surprisingly progressive about. But then there's a lot of things in the sort of day-to-day life of the Nazarene church that are certainly very conservative. So we would fall in the mess of theology sometimes category. Or to be more generous, I'd say we're a big tent church, or at least we aspire to be, I think.
Now, as I understand it, the Nazarenes kind of stem from the Azusa Street. I may be incorrect here, so correct me if I am wrong. But the Azusa Street revival of the early 20th century. But at a certain point, the Nazarenes started out as charismatics, but they later kind of rejected a lot of the charismatic things like speaking in tongues and those aspects.
Kind of. So that's where we kind of confuse people. So we definitely have roots from Azusa Street, though I would say that our deeper roots are in Methodism. And so a lot of the guys who founded the church or were Methodist pastors. The guy who kind of gets credit as the founder, although again there's kind of a group of guys, is Phineas F. Brzee, and he was from Los Angeles, and so he would have been around Azusa Street when it was going on, and so they're born at the same, or the Nazarene Church is born at that same moment, and they originally adopt the name Pentecostal Church of the Nazarene, and so that's where they get this, or we get this reputation for being or having a charismatic background. But we actually are not and have never been charismatic in that sort of sense of like speaking in tongues, or at least that's the line that we draw that would divide us from like the bigger Pentecostal movement. You would see back in the day, you would certainly have charismatic as an adjective, like tent revivals in churches. I've seen people when I was younger. I've gone to camp meetings because we still hold camp meetings where people would run the aisles or, stand up and wave their hands and do that kind of stuff. But that's typically about as charismatic as Nazarenes get these days. You definitely hear somebody say amen or somebody stand up, during a song. But for the most part, they're traditional conservative white Protestants who, sit peacefully in the pews until it's time to go.
Yeah, I did notice that because I believe at Trevecca, there's one of the buildings there. There's some glass windows that show, or it may be some marble reliefs, but it shows Jesus and it shows some of the other church fathers. And yeah, John Wesley is one of those. So, yeah. Some of it's sort of rewriting our history a little bit because there certainly are Pentecostal connections because, we come out of the holiness revival of the, early 20th century. Right. But today especially, but also at our founding. So, because again, it was kind of a conglomeration of, a few people who were coming out of that, a few people who were coming out of Methodism, and they all agreed that holiness, or this sort of idea of holiness and sanctification as a second work of grace was really important. So that's what unites them. But Wesley, John Wesley in particular, obviously his brother Charles too, but John Wesley is definitely considered a theological grandfather of our denomination for sure. Okay. Yeah. My dad is a Methodist, so
good. Yeah, I was
a little bit of that. Yeah.
Yeah. They're good. If you, went to, your average Methodist church and went to your average Nazarene church, the only real difference that you would notice would be, pastors wearing, liturgical garb. That would really be the biggest. Some of them would be a little more traditional, but if you went to a contemporary, like Church of the Resurrection, Adam Hamlin's church out in Kansas City, that, something like that, that's a little more contemporary, although I think he's got, various services. But if you went to a contemporary Methodist church and a contemporary Nazarene church, you wouldn't really notice a big difference, at least from a Sunday morning service.
Yeah. How do you feel about the charismatic movement? How do you feel about the aspects like speaking in tongues and I know there's so many aspects to it, but you have some people out there that even believe that they can even raise the dead now and stuff like that. Like, what do you think about some of that?
It's interesting. I think it's maybe a complicated subject. So I grew up in the Nazarene church and, we were always really insecure about not being lumped in with those people. If that makes sense. Like we don't speak in tongues and, I've had plenty of people. I actually worked at the Methodist church for a while. And when I was interviewing for the job, somebody asked me if we handled snakes. And we do, but that's personal. No, we don't. we don't handle snakes. But so we've always been sensitive to do that. I think part of the problem with addressing that conversation is there's such a wide spectrum of what it means to be charismatic.
Right. Right.
So it's easy to dismiss that movement and with a big broad brush and say, this is a group of fanatics who do weird things and make claims that are ridiculous about, whether it's raising the dead or there's weird stuff about gold dust falling from the sky. And
yeah, I've heard that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it's easy to take the extreme quirkiness of that and dismiss the movement as a whole. But, I have friends who are, and this is obviously anecdotal, but, friends who are very serious about their faith, who are much more or would be as suspicious of that stuff as I am, even though they would proudly identify as, Pentecostal charismatic. One of the other aspects that tends, or of, the charismatic movement that tends to be caricatured is this lack of theological reflection. And that's certainly the case for some, areas or some corners of the movement. But like I said, I've got a lot of friends who are deeply reflective and deeply serious about, being orthodox and understanding, the roots of their faith and, developing a systematic theology. And, taking their faith and the development of their faith and discipleship every bit as seriously as any, mainline or traditional church. So, theologically, I would raise some questions and doubts about anything that causes confusion or distraction particularly in time of worship when our focus is supposed to be on God.
Sure.
And so but as much as I would criticize something in the charismatic movement that might do that, like fake gold dust, I would emphasize fake because there's no even remote biblical, historical, theological justification for that. But if that's a distraction, I would also criticize, laser light shows and fog machines and, a mainline Christian church. So it's not limited to them. I think that they're like any other tradition, honestly. There's some really great, wonderful people, and there's some crazy people. And that's the same for the Church of the Nazarene and for Methodism and for the Catholics and for, Eastern Orthodox folks and, anybody, that you can meet. I think, I've gotten to a point now where I'm less concerned with the minutia of your theological position or the nuance of how you interpret, Paul's talking in whatever 1 Corinthians passage it is, than I am with whether or not you're feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and caring for the least of these. Mm-hmm. I'm not old. I'm 34, but the longer I do ministry or the longer I write and reflect the faith, and as I get to a point where, my children are growing up and I'm going to start having to teach them the faith. And as I think about, how am I going to do that? What are the important things that I'm going to emphasize? And, theology is still important to me. Orthodoxy is, so important to me. But the more I look at the life of Jesus, the more I see someone who's concerned much more with how we treat our neighbor than what we profess to believe theologically. I mean,
sure.
Look at the greatest commandment. It's not, the greatest commandment is make sure you check off this, did you memorize the Apostles' Creed? It's, love the Lord your God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. So, as long as you're incarnating the faith, or incarnating Jesus to people and you're not abusing or hurting people in any way, if handling snakes is your thing, then more power to you, I guess. The funny thing, okay, not to ramble, but in my first day of intro to Bib Faith, or maybe it was New Testament, the professor gets up there and he looks at the passage that the snake handlers get that from is in, I think, Mark 15. And we look at it and he says, well, we're Bible believing people. And he has us read us this passage in Mark that says, we'll take up snakes and drink poison and we won't be harmed. And he says, well, why don't we do this? And, we're all these wide-eyed freshmen and we've all been in Sunday school our whole lives and we're all dumbfounded. We're like, well, I don't know. The Bible says we should do this. Why aren't we doing this? And he's like, well, think about it and come back to the next class and we'll discuss it. And so we get there and, we've all got our deep theological answers that, in retrospect made no sense. But the answer to the question was simple. Those verses don't appear in the Bible. They're in our Bibles today, but if you look at the verse, there's a footnote and at the bottom it says, these passages or this passage does not appear, in the oldest manuscripts that we have. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's very interesting when you start paying.
Do you know when they were introduced and why, by chance?
That's a great question. As a church historian, I should know that, but I'm not a Bible historian, so I don't have to know that. That's a great question. I don't. My guess is that it's in the first millennia, so give or take a few centuries there. But most of those things that we have that are additions, so it's called like redaction criticism. So you'll see that more in like liberal scholarship. Than you do in most conservatives. I mean, you see conservative scholars doing redaction criticism too, but it's looking back at the Gospels, looking at anywhere in Scripture and seeing, okay, was this part of the original text and trying to see, because sometimes you'll come across a passage that's like, wow, this is kind of out of nowhere, and it really throws off the flow of a chapter. And there's a chance that was added by a scribe. And if you begin to look at the language and look at this, that, and the other, it becomes apparent that certain parts, were added later on. Whether that means later on in the sense of, Matthew wrote it today and somebody, after he died, the next week added something else, or, they added 200 years. The Bible has a lot of that kind of stuff, and it doesn't, take away from the truth of it per se. But, I don't know. Most of it happened within the first couple of centuries of the faith, because, Christianity is not this monolithic thing that, pops out of Galilee in 33 AD after Jesus dies, and then is just sort of this orthodox thing from that point on. It's really more accurate to talk about Christianities, plural, particularly for the first century of the faith.
Right.
That's what Constantine is trying to combat in the 4th century when he brings people together at Nicaea. There's certainly political motivations, but they're also trying to unite the church and try to say, okay, we have all these different ideas. Well, what can we agree on that's going to unite us? What is the true faith? What is, the gospel? What is orthodoxy? So in that interim period of the 1st century, and really the first, 2-3 centuries, if not more, I'm embarrassing myself if any of my more educated friends are listening. They're going to make fun of me for saying, well, you didn't mention this. But, for the first few centuries, you've got, not just the books that we have today, but you've got other kinds of what are now called apocryphal texts that, look kind of weird to us today and are like, wow, why would anybody read that? But were used by Christians, faithful Jesus believing Christians in the first couple of centuries of the church before the Bible coalesces the Bible. And so some of that stuff like the snakes and the drinking poison would have gotten in during that period of the faith as what we are calling the New Testament became the New Testament, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a really rambling answer for it happened early on.
If you look at the Gospel of Mark, there's, I believe it's Mark. I think that there's like the last few verses are actually kind of disputed as to whether that was actually in there to begin with or not. Yes, that's a really great point. So the passage of the snakes and the poison is just kind of a fun, quirky thing. It doesn't really have any ramifications. But the end of Mark, I think it's actually Mark 15, and the other one is not Mark 15 because Mark only has 15 chapters. Or does it have 16? I should be Googling this so I can look more intelligent and not look stupid. They're like, this guy has a degree from Yale and he doesn't know how many chapters there are in Mark. I was a church historian, not a Bible scholar. But no, you're exactly right. Mark, the original ending of Mark ends with the women going to the tomb and then they run away because they were afraid. Right. And that's it. Yeah. Well, so they do find it empty, right? Isn't that part of it? Yeah.
They do find it empty, but then they leave. But there's no post-resurrection appearance of Jesus in the original Mark. And so, that's really interesting because Mark is considered the oldest gospel, and it's considered the gospel on which Matthew and Luke both base their gospels on. And they obviously both have, resurrection stories. And so, the problem with it is that it opens up the door to people saying, well, see, the oldest Christians didn't believe in the resurrection. And that simply would not be true. So it's interesting, and it raises a lot of questions and should spark a lot of conversations. But yeah, you're right. The ending of Mark is really fascinating. The footnotes in your Bible are fascinating if you take a second to look at them, and that's probably the most fascinating one.
Yeah, that was a good example of it. I think one of the most good examples of it. Let's talk a little bit about your blog before we get into some of the deeper stuff. What were you trying to? Because you started it out as the American Jesus blog, and now it's just zackhunt.com. What did you set out to do with that blog? What was kind of like your goal with it?
As I was telling you guys before we started, I've been writing about this week for a book I'm contributing to, and I was strolling down memory lane and going back to the beginning and thinking about that, and it didn't really start off with this a big purpose in mind. I mean, not that I have some magical plan today, but a youth pastor friend of mine and I, we'd have Google Talk open on our computers while we were working during the day. And, we'd send funny stories or videos or memes or whatever. And, we'd talk about them. Sometimes it would just be, this is hilarious, or if there was some, serious story, we'd end up having some conversation about it. And at some point, we got the arrogant idea that the rest of the world would benefit from our humor and insights, and decided to start a blog. And so we called it The American Jesus. It's we just liked the imagery of that because, we were going to focus on the American Christianity and the ways.
Now, was that from the Bad Religion song? Because
that's the funny thing is I've never actually heard that song.
Okay.
It's a weird thing. Like I know about it, and I knew pretty quickly because people would ask me about Bad Religion, and now like I have this bizarre thing where I don't want to listen to it because like out of some weird principle that makes absolutely no sense. But now that I've dropped the American Jesus, I should probably listen to it.
Well, they are kind of like a humanist, kind of like atheist. They have that worldview.
Oh, some of my best friends are atheists. I love those folks. It's
mine too.
Those kind of reasons. I'm telling you, like, there's really no legitimate reason. It's just dumb on my end. But no, it's Stephen Prothero is a professor at Boston University, and he wrote a book called American Jesus, which is actually really, really good, way better than anything I've ever written. And it traces the, I guess, evolution of Jesus in America from the beginning when Thomas Jefferson makes his famous Bible where he gets a hold of the Bible. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, stop me. But he gets a hold of a Bible and he grabs a pair of scissors and some glue and starts chopping out pieces of the gospel that he doesn't think Jesus actually said, or things that he doesn't believe Jesus actually did, like all of the miracles. And he creates his own Bible. Right. Yeah.
Jefferson Bible. Mm-hmm.
Jefferson Bible. And so Prothero kind of uses that as the foundation for understanding American Christianity, that we sort of cut and paste our faith based on, cultural milieu of the day, our personal interest, our biases, our prejudices, or just our cultural settings. And it's a fascinating look at that, and it traces it up to the modern day. And so we just like that imagery, and so we went with it. And the early days was really just an incarnation of our Google Talk exchanges. And so it was a lot of, we'd write a post every once in a while, but it was a lot of, hey, here's a really silly music video from the 80s, or, oh my gosh, can you believe this church sign? And that kind of stuff. And so it was fun. It was a lot of satire. It wasn't anything very serious. But he eventually got a real job as a pastor, and I kept on youth ministry and kept doing the blog. And a couple years ago, decided that I wanted to take things in a little more serious direction and not quite be beholden to only talking about American Christianity or overtly American Christian themes all the time. And so I kind of rebranded under my own name, just because I'm egotistical and want people to know who I am. Really, is what it comes down to.
What are some of the best subjects that you talk about on the blog? Like, so what's some of the, what concerns you the most about American Christianity as it is?
Wow. I think, so if you follow me for any length of time, you probably get tired of me citing Matthew 25. For me, that is the heart of the gospel. It's the one place in all four gospels, the only place where Jesus explicitly describes how he's going to decide, who goes to heaven and who doesn't. And, it's not, did you affirm the virgin birth? Did you, believe in the right atonement theory? It's not even, did you go down to an altar and say the Lord's Prayer? It's, I was hungry, did you feed me? I was thirsty. Did you give me something to drink? And so that's obviously become a big point of contention in, recent weeks and months with Trump and the refugee crisis and things like that. But, disconnect between, Protestant or white evangelicalism in particular and, Matthew 25 or the gospel in general, didn't happen overnight. It's been going on for a long time. Not just decades, but you could trace it back to Charles Finney in the late 19th century, who has people come down to what's called a mourner's bench, and they essentially sit down on a chair in front of everybody and confess their sins and have what's really the the forerunner to the altar experience that we have now, where, at least in the Nazarene church, where you're like, do you feel Jesus speaking to you tonight? Why don't you come down and, lay your sins on the altar and Jesus will forgive you. That mentality or that framework begins in the late 18th, 19th century in the Third Great Awakening, and then the Holiness Revival really picks up steam, which is what my denomination came out of. And the problem is, it really goes back to Martin Luther, if we want to be honest, and the idea that we're saved by faith alone. Martin Luther still had a big, heavy emphasis on how you live, and Calvin, who follows him, certainly did as well. But the holiness movement, the Third Great Awakening, Finney and all these other guys really begin to change that in a lot of ways. And so they still emphasize particulars of way of life. Like I said, earlier about Nazarenes, we were really big on this second work of grace or this big conversion moment. But we were also really big on these particulars on how you lived your life. The problem was, and the problem still is, that when the things that we emphasize on the particular ways of life aren't always social justice, although the Nazarene Church, to their credit, early on was really big about caring for the poor. A lot of the things we worried about then and now are you smoking? Are you drinking? Are you having sex before you're married? That kind of stuff. But the problem is ideology has become our savior, really. I mean, Jesus is there, but it's not really Jesus or really even his death on the cross. I mean, that helps. But what really saves us is our confession of faith in evangelicalism. I think that, not to jump ahead, but I think that's what opens up the door to a lot of Christians being able to accept or convince themselves that someone like Donald Trump is a Christian. It's because he said so, and that's it. And that's all that really matters. And so all these other things are secondary. And so that opens the door to a huge amount of problems. And so I think the underlying, where my rambling is going, the underlying theme of what I write about a lot is the problem in really not just evangelicalism, but American Christianity in general and Christianity around the world. And that's the problem of loving ideology more than we love people. And what I mean by that is that we idolize right belief. We hold intellectual assent up as the most important thing in the Christian faith. Did you verbally confess Jesus as Lord? And as a starting point, that's great. But the problem is we make it the end point. And the reason that's a problem is that James goes on and says, you believe that Jesus, I'm paraphrasing here, you believe that Jesus is Lord. And he says, great. Even the demons believe that and shudder, So the idea, that our right beliefs is going to save us is just nonsense, not just to James, but going back to Jesus again in Matthew 25. And so for me, the biggest thing and the underlying theme, I think, in all my writing is restructuring, I think, how we understand salvation, although I don't ever really articulate it that way, but how we understand salvation and how we understand the Christian life, and that we understand that the Christian life is fundamentally tied to salvation, that works do matter. That when Luther talks about works being bad, he's not talking about feeding the hungry. He's talking about, religious rituals that the Catholic Church required. And so for me, I think a big part of my writing mission, I guess, if I might be overstating it, is trying to recapture Matthew 25 and is trying to put incarnating the faith back at the forefront of Christianity where it was for at least the beginning of the faith.
See, I wonder if people even think about it in the same way that you're thinking about it.
I don't think so.
Because I think a lot of people just look at it and say, well, hey, I don't even know if they even think about it to say like, well, I'm saved and therefore I can do what I want and I don't have to, do all these other things, because there are people that will go out there and they will, go down to the rescue mission and they'll volunteer and they'll, maybe feed the homeless or have like a canned food drive or something like that, or donate to their church to give to orphanages, all these different things that Christians do and should be doing. But yet at the same time, we'll be like, well, I don't want, the Muslims here and Donald Trump is the right hand of God. And, because you do see that as well.
Yeah. It's interesting. And I think kind of what you kind of alluded to at the beginning is part of the problem is there's a lack of reflection on things, like self-reflection. I think the amount of reflection that a lot of people put in their faith begins and ends with the question of, am I going to heaven or am I going to hell? And once that question is answered, everything else is just gravy, so to speak. There's not really an impetus to do anything else. If all I have to do is say this prayer and Jesus will forgive me and I go to heaven, then why do I need to bother thinking about all these other things? And so you really can't blame them. Like there was this book that came out several years ago called Almost Christian. And it was written by a professor at Princeton Theological Seminary, Kenda Dean. And it was looking at youth ministry, or looking at teens, and how young people are all leaving the faith and that kind of stuff. And so they did a bunch of research and studies, and we're looking into that and looking into why teens are doing that. And they discovered that a lot of people, what do they call it? Moralistic therapeutic deism was the name that they came up with it. And what they mean by that is that these young people believe that God is good, generally good, and God is there for you when things get really bad, but like that's about the extent of your faith. That's about the extent of their relationship with God. And that wasn't really revelatory or news. But what was interesting was that these young people, now they would be millennials, weren't coming up with this stuff on their own. I mean, this radically reductionist version of Christianity, where I did my prayer, I got saved, now God's there when I need Him, and I don't have to worry about Him when I don't. What is not the invention of millennials? Millennials are just practicing the faith that they were taught by their parents, and their parents are just practicing the faith that they were taught by their parents, and and so on and so on. And so it's frustrated as I get with nominal Christianity that can say Jesus is Lord while living a life that says Trump is Lord or Caesar's Lord, or however you want to put it.
Same difference.
I don't know. I mean, we all bear personal responsibility for things, but I don't know how much of it is the fault of the laity and how much of it is the fault of the church for doing a really bad job at discipleship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it does. It really does. I mean, you definitely see this. There are specific people out there in the evangelical community that really have pushed Trump.
Yeah.
Guys like Rick Joyner, Jim Baker, all these guys. There's so many others. What is it? Lance Wallnau, is another one that pushes Trump. And it's just, they see him. It's almost as like they see him as being like, well, he's not perfect, but he's going to protect the unborn, and he's not going to quote unquote persecute us like that evil Obama did. Yeah. And they're willing to overlook the grab the pussy comment and all these other kind of things. And the one thing that I heard so much leading up to the election was, well, he's the new Cyrus or the new King David, because God will use imperfect men like Cyrus and King David to lead the Israelites home. And then there's that equation there with the Israelites and going back to the Holy Land when Cyrus comes in, they go back to the Holy Land, and equating that with American Christians, which is just frightening.
It's always interesting to me that, like, when people turn to the Bible to make these, America is God's people arguments, they never turn to the New Testament. They never look at Jesus. It's always national from the Old Testament. It's such a weird phenomenon. I mean, it's such a disturbing phenomenon. I don't know that. I mean, if I'm being fair to self-professed Christians who support Trump, I'm sure I know there's a multitude of reasons why they cast their ballot the way they did. But I was talking to a friend of mine who's a pastor, and he's also a psychologist, and he had a really interesting insight. And he talked about the power of hell in this. And I don't mean hell as in like a real physical place, but just the concept, whether or not you believe it's real or not, just the concept alone and how powerful it is. Because like you said earlier, one of the driving forces, I would say one of the big driving forces that allows people to compromise their faith to support someone as objectionably awful as Donald Trump is abortion. And it is this belief that if we can just get one more Supreme Court justice, even though it keeps the balance exactly the way it was for the past 20 years, if we can just get one more Supreme Court justice, we'll overturn Roe v. Wade. If we overturn Roe v. Wade, there will be no more abortions, which is all complete and utter nonsense. Like if you outlawed abortion tomorrow, it just moves into the shadows. It doesn't end.
Plus, it's been 45 years since Roe v. Wade, and and Republicans have been in power a good percentage of that time, and nobody's repealed it yet.
Yeah, and it's not going to happen, but it is an incredibly powerful wedge issue, for people. And so the Republican Party has realized this, and I think it's a large reason of why they've hijacked Christianity. I mean, if you go back pre-moral majority in the 60s or 70s, go back to earlier, evangelicals, to whatever extent they are involved in politics, and it's not to the extent at all today, abortion is not a major issue. It's an issue for some people, but it's not this die on a hill kind of thing. It's not till Jerry Falwell shows up and the rest of the moral majority and make it this big issue that it becomes this dominant thing.
Yeah, that would be more like in the 80s probably.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So the 70s, it's not. 80s when they show up, it is when it becomes this sort of thing. And I think, and this is the conversation I was having with my pastor friend, is that for a lot of conservative Christians, abortion is not just a black or white, right or wrong issue. It's an issue of heaven or hell. And so they believe that if they in any way support abortion or allow for abortion, even in extreme cases, that their soul is damned to hell for eternity. And he was telling me about a study that a psychologist was doing, and I don't know that it was directly on hell. I actually tried to take the time to look it up, and the study I found was done on the effect of terror and terrorism on the brain. And I'm going to cheat and read this from the article that I read. The professor of psychology at the Einstein School of Medicine in New York said the normal long pathways through the orbitofrontal cortex, where people evaluate situations in a logical and conscious fashion and consider the risk and benefits of different behaviors, that gets short-circuited in a moment of terror or when we feel, intense fear. And if you put that in the context of hell, it helps this Christian support for Trump, at least for me, make some sort of sense. Because if you are completely and utterly convinced that if you're not pro-life, that you're going to go to hell forever, that if your eternal salvation rests on this one issue, then you can push everything else to the side. You can look beyond the grab the pussy comment. You can look beyond the corruption. You can look beyond, his, refusal to ask for forgiveness. You can look beyond, all of the awful things. You can look beyond his demonization of the people Jesus said you needed to love. You can look beyond the gospel even, because heaven or hell are at stake, and your brain, according to this study, and, it's not definitive, but I think it's an interesting, look at this. I mean, if your brain is actually shutting down and your ability to make rational thoughts is shutting down because of fear, I can't think of a scarier thing than eternal conscious torment. And why I don't affirm eternal conscious torment, if you're convinced that really exists and that you're headed there if you don't take this stand against abortion, then it starts to make sense how you can turn a blind eye to everything else in Christianity and support Donald Trump if he gives you this carrot and says, if you for me, we'll get rid of abortion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It does make sense. I think there's some other aspects involved
absolutely.
As well, and especially when you get to the whole Muslim issue.
Yes.
Okay. There is and this has absolutely nothing to do with Jesus or Christianity, but it's wrapped up in Jesus and Christianity. And it's also wrapped up in this idea of Christendom. We talked about on the show about one of Steve Bannon's favorite books. You remember this from last week, Rob?
Yeah.
Talking about the Camp of the Saints. This book that basically was written by this French author in the 1970s, talking about this wave of migrants coming into Europe and how they were going to fight for Christendom and for Western civilization. So you have this whole Christendom and Western civilization thing against the dark hordes of the East. And that in effect really is just tribalism.
Absolutely.
And then there is also this whole idea that people will hold America and the United States, the country that they're in, as in almost like an idol.
Yeah.
Against with Jesus, like.
Yeah.
Like I've seen so many things, so many pictures, Jesus holding the American flag, or, the song, I saw Jesus waving the stars and stripes. And it's like America and patriotism and ultra-nationalism become mixed together with Christ, who was probably the least nationalist. What did he say? Give unto Caesar what is Caesar, and give unto God what is God's.
Yeah.
There's someone that was executed by the most powerful state in the world at the time. It nailed to a cross, the symbol of this powerful empire.
Yeah.
Totally the opposite. But people will say, no, Jesus in America, it's the same thing, man.
Yeah, I mean, there's something. I want to kind of piggyback on what you said. I mean, let's not,
especially here in Nashville.
Yeah,
go up to go up here a little bit from us. Go over to what's the church over there where they do the rappelling off the wall? Cornerstone.
Wait, where? What?
Yeah.
They rappel.
Yeah, they have soldiers rappel from the wall during 4th of July.
They have a massive flag. Well, during Easter last year, 2 years ago, they did it was March Madness. They wheeled in basketball goals, and then had people shoot for money. They are full of gimmicks, but they're full of patriotism too.
Oh yeah.
It's bizarre because and I think it's twofold. I think fear is part of it because, again, it's xenophobia and racism. We're afraid of people who are different. But there's an intoxication to the idea of authority affirming. I mean, we all love the idea that authority affirms our beliefs, right? And it's the logical fallacy known as appeal to authority, right? Because just being an authority doesn't justify an argument, or appealing to authority doesn't justify an argument. But there's something even more intoxicating about God affirming your bigotry, your worldview, right? And so I think that's really the appeal of American Christianity, of the American Jesus, of the sort of things you're describing, is that, and really the appeal of Donald Trump. I mean, this pitch of "Make America Great Again" is a really thinly veiled euphemism to make America white again. To make America like it was in the 50s, the good old days. And it was
the good old days that never exist. The good old days never exist.
Yeah, unless you're a middle class white guy, and then it was great. You know what I mean? Or a rich white guy, and then maybe America was great at that point. But I think what's been so intoxicating about Donald Trump, and then by extension, what's intoxicating, why people are so eager to marry him to Christianity or marry America to Christianity, is that he represents the normalization of a lot of really terrible beliefs and attitudes. And now that he's president, in the minds of a lot of people, it's okay to be racist. It's okay to be xenophobic. It's okay to be misogynistic. And all of that gets lumped under the other euphemism of not being politically correct, which is really just code for, I want to be a jerk. I want to say whatever I want to say. Everybody's feelings be damned. But I think, and I've tried to understand this for a long time, and it's hard to understand because, as we talked about before, so much of American Christianity is a walking contradiction. I mean, you have people who not just support a vulgar misogynist, but people who are rabidly opposed to refugees, even though the God they worship was a refugee. It makes no sense. You have people who are rabidly in support of the death penalty, even though the God they worship suffered the death penalty. You know, they're radically opposed to Muslims, even though, and actually my pastor preached on this morning, even though Jesus goes out of his way to eat with Samaritans and turn them into the good guys in his in his story. And
there are churches out there that are reaching out to refugees and are reaching out to Muslims, and Muslims are converting. But as long as we're sitting here saying, no, we don't like you, don't come here. It's like those people are not going to come to Christ. They're just not.
Well, and that's kind of, one of the frustrating things is that, the people, the news media gets a bad rap, and I think unfairly a lot of times, but one of the fair criticisms is that, they tend to report on the most outrageous and provocative things. As a blogger, I get that those things generate traffic and, they're in the business of reporting the news, but to be honest, they're in the business of, paying their bills as well. We all have mortgages and rent and food that we need to eat. And so, they've got to sell ad space, and like the shocking and the crazy and the insane, causes more people to click on news stories and causes more people to turn to nightly news. And so like the Christianity that is so, hypocritical, the Christianity that is so ridiculous, the Christianity that's so hateful gets a lot more attention than the Christianity that's finding new and creative ways to serve the hungry, that are putting, food trucks into, free meals, that are, finding homes for refugees, that are, welcoming LGBT people or whatever, the issue is. And you're right. There are lots of people doing that. And that's what's so hard about the conversation is even if you try to say, and it's easy to pick on evangelicals, but like, what is an evangelical? Like
it's a broad-based term.
Yeah. Like, even at Yale, where you're supposed to have all these super smart people, I sat in a classroom, the history of American evangelicalism, and we could not, not that I'm smart and along the lines of these guys, but people who went on to do PhDs at Yale and Princeton and blah, blah, blah. And none of us could come up with a definition. And our, esteemed professors couldn't come up with a definition that all of us could agree on because it's kind of like Jell-O, like you throw it against the wall and it just goes to pieces. Like it looks like it's this firm, solid thing, but as soon as you pick it up, it just, falls apart in your hand.
Yeah.
Because you can have one person who believes they're an evangelical or what professes to be an evangelical, and they voted for Donald Trump and they hate the Muslims and they don't, if their kid is gay, they're going to kick them out of the house. And you have another person who's evangelical, who's, radically affirming and who, opens their door to refugees and can't believe Donald Trump is president. So, it's a hard conversation to have. And you feel like you're constantly hedging on things, or at least I do with, there's those evangelicals and those evangelicals. But, I think the problem is, and why it should matter to all of us is that at the moment, those evangelicals, meaning the ones that are supporting Trump, are kind of have become the face of Christianity in America to the rest of the world.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Here's the scary thing, is that a lot of people, and this was a few years ago before Trump even said he was going to run for president. People were saying you'd ask people that maybe were not Christian, or maybe they weren't exposed to it. Like there was a poll out there, I think, that said what do you think when you think of what do you think when you think of Christians?
Yeah.
Not evangelicals, not American Christians, just Christians.
Yep.
It's like 1 billion people on the planet, and they're like anti-gay.
Yep.
That was the answer.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what's so frustrating is that, and it's certainly not all the media's fault, but like some of the blame lies on the rest of us for not doing more to make, a bigger, it's hard because like you can't just sit there and say, guys, look at all the awesome charity things I'm doing, because that's a problem too. But I get frustrated,
yeah,
from a pastoral and from an academic standpoint too. I look online and there's, a finite amount of theological traditions and a finite amount of, religio-political positions too, that like take up most of the space online. The people like progressive corners or mainline corners, those parts of Christianity for some reason have the hardest time engaging culture, whether that's, TV. Look who dominates the TV wave. There's no reason that like, every Christian brand under the sun should, couldn't have a TV show or whatever, but the people that dominate the Christian airwaves are the wackos who are saying, give me your money and I'll make you rich because God's going to make you rich or whatever.
You mean Peter Popoff's miracle water doesn't work? Man, I sent that guy $10,000.
See, who's the guy selling buckets?
That's Jim Baker.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. But yeah, you know what I mean? Like, and it's the same way, like, take your Mark Driscoll, for example. Like I can't think of someone, or there are a few people that I disagree with on the issues of theology more than Mark Driscoll. But when he was at Mars Hill, they did fantastic graphics. They made incredible videos just from like not from a content perspective necessarily, because obviously theologically I'm not on the same page, but just aesthetically, they're creating really high quality material. And for someone like me, who's on like the opposite end of the theological spectrum, I look around and there's hardly anyone who's doing that. And even fewer people who are doing it well. And so like, I think that carries on into the stuff we're doing with Trump. You're starting to see, more people speak out louder. You're seeing people starting to take more action. You're seeing people starting to come together in groups more and trying to be more intentional. And so I'm hopeful about that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how this resolves itself. I mean, if this isn't the closest thing that Christianity has seen to a schism, since the Great Schism or even the Reformation, I don't know what is. 'Cause I mean, one of the things that infuriates me about it are the people in the middle who look at this Trump Christianity issue and see it as just one more political debate, that, it's just a difference of opinion. And it's like, it's not, I mean, we're talking about the fundamentals of our faith. We're talking about the nature of the gospel. We're talking about who Jesus is and what it means to be Christian. And the view on that or the way that's being played out is not reconcilable. I mean, I've said it, Miroslav Volf has said it, a million other people said it. You can't follow Jesus and support Donald Trump. I mean, it's irreconcilable.
Well, I look at Trump, whenever I would look at Trump before he ran for president, I was never like, oh man, that guy's like the paragon of Christian virtue.
Yeah.
Like never in my mind did the words Donald Trump and Christian come together until 2016. Right?
Yeah. It's amazing how people find their faith when they are trying to get elected.
Yeah. Well, the way I look at it, it's a cynical power politics, right? I mean, in effect, Putin has kind of done the same thing over in Russia because now he's seen Putin, the guy who poisons people with radioactive materials. Yeah. He's seen as the paragon of the defender of the faith over there.
Yeah.
And for some evangelicals here in the United States, he's seen that way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's crazy. I mean, there's just no other way to describe it. I mean, we can sit here and like try to diagnose it. And, I think that's important, to try to understand where these people are coming from. But like at the end of the day, I mean, I think you fight fear with love, but it's hard to even have a conversation with people who are so convinced that, Muslims are coming to, blow them up or, atheists are going to take away their Bibles or whatever, Well, like, how do you even start that conversation? I think that's kind of the big question of the day.
Look at the God's Not Dead movies. Okay. I mean, it's perfectly fine to, I think I would have probably appreciated it had it been just a debate to prove the existence of God or to prove the existence of, or an apologetic for Christianity. But also through the whole thing, it's just like the evil atheists, and they're all out to get us Christians, and the colleges are going to corrupt your children, and the anti-intellectualism that runs through evangelical Christianity is also worrying.
Oh, it's terrifying. I mean, I think it's obvious that Donald Trump is the climax or the culmination of the marriage of American Christianity and politics, particularly conservative evangelicalism in politics, and he's rabidly anti-intellectual. I mean, he's gutting the arts, he's gutting the EPA, he's gutting the State Department. It's terrifying. I think going back to that "Make Great America Again" statement, as much as it's a "Make America White Again," I think it's also make America black and white again, like ideologically, not racially, in the sense of, I think the appeal of Donald Trump and the appeal of certain theological traditions is that we live in a rapidly changing world. Obviously, we live in a world that's increasingly, or it gets smaller by the day. I mean, we live in a globalized world, and the people who used to be those people over there that, you never really had to think about are now your neighbors. And for a lot of people, that's scary. Issues of gender identity and marriage are changing, have changed rapidly in our country, and how people support that and how people don't, or whatever. Those numbers have shifted. And you pull those things together, and it's scary, and when you are confronted with the reality that, like, those conversations require a lot of nuance, whether it's, dealing with same-sex marriage or dealing with, your Muslim neighbors or whatever it is, like, you can't have those you can have those conversations in black and white terms when those people live on the other side of the ocean or they're not part of your family. But once they become part of your family and they become your neighbors, like, your ideology becomes difficult to sustain if it's just black and white, and Donald Trump shows up promising black and white answers to everything, and victories to everything. And I think that's the appeal of him, but it's also appeal, like you said, like with God's Not Dead, is that, you have this enemy that you can still demonize in atheists. You have this enemy in professors in the academy or whatever. And it's all black and white. And you have this hero student who shows up, and proves that, like, Christianity is right, and that, we've got all the right answers. And that's what it's all about, is right answers of black and white questions with black and white answers. And I like to tell people, I don't know if you guys know this, but I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma last year.
I heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm doing fine now. It was, if you're going to get cancer, get Hodgkin's lymphoma. It's got I always joke, I make a lot of cancer jokes, so my apologies for that before I begin. But it's like a fake cancer. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's like, I show up at a cancer survivor meeting and they're like, "What are you doing here?" That's a joke. There's no cancer survivor meetings that I go to. It's got a 95% cure rate. So it's like, don't get me wrong. It was terrifying the day that
absolutely. You're a young guy,
Yeah. Young people aren't supposed to get cancer. I mean, it's scary and it's awful, but it's, I'm doing fine, and it's over with, thankfully. And, anyway, but during that process, along with getting to tell a lot of inappropriate jokes that make people uncomfortable, there was a lot of people that reached out to us, thankfully, a lot of people that supported us. And, a couple friend of ours really stepped up to the bat. I mean, I think if anybody was Jesus during that time, it was them. I mean, they started a GoFundMe page that helped us pay for medical bills and for traveling. They watched our kids. They brought us food. When I was going through chemo, they helped us move. I mean, they were Jesus in every sort of tangible way that I would expect Christians to be Jesus, and they're atheist. Mm-hmm. And I
thought you were going to say they were gay, but
no, they're worse. They're atheists. No, and I always, when I'm talking about like my cancer stories and stuff like that, I like to bring that up, particularly at churches, because like we like to pat ourselves on the back through movies or through devotional books or through sermons or whatever about, how like we're the good guys and everybody else is the bad guys. And if it's not for us, then, the world's going to fall apart and whatever. And the reality is, like, the world's a lot more complicated than that. Faith is a lot more complicated than that. God is a lot more complicated than that. Like, God, if you read the Bible, God has this nasty habit of showing up in places where God's not supposed to show up. And God has a nasty habit of working through people that he's not supposed to work through, like prostitutes and adulterers and murderers and Samaritans, and I think the great challenge of our time in the Christian faith is not Donald Trump. It's how do we practice Christianity in a world that's not black and white? I mean, that's always been a great challenge, but we've been able to live in a black and white world for millennia because we all live in our own little tribes. We live in our little tribe called America that's, that's separated by two huge oceans from everybody else in the world. We if you're white, you have the ability to move to your, white flight neighborhood and go to your white only, schools and, live in your own little community, and even, beyond racism stuff. And we have the ability to live in our own little denominations, to go to our own little churches, to have our own circle of friends. And so it's easy to, live in a bubble. And the internet, social media, politics, globalization, the economy, I mean, all those things are shattering our ability to live in that bubble and practice our faith in the bubble. And I think what you're seeing with Trumpism, with Christianity is panic and is fear and not knowing how to do that. And so you got a guy who promises to rebuild the bubble, and that's intoxicating.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry for the rambling.
And your point there about us being secluded to ourselves and like-minded people. And, with this show, I mean, I try to get people on that have different points of view. I've had people on that are fervent Trump supporters, just because I want to understand where they come from.
Sure.
But, but also to add to your point there, it's like, what did Christ say, to the apostles, go and teach to all the nations. He didn't just say, go and just teach to the Jews, even though it did kind of start out that way. But he did say, go and teach to all the nations. And
sorry, go ahead.
I wanted Rob to get Rob's opinion on some of this.
I had a good point. I forgot what it was there.
Sure you did, Rob.
No, it was brilliant, man. I'm telling you. What was the last thing that you were talking about there, Zach?
It was brilliant. I can tell you that much. No, what were we talking about?
It was about about us being secluded in our different.
Oh yeah.
Our white people and Christian people.
Yeah, because for me, religion has always been it's a deeply personal thing. Like it's I don't want to use the old like, oh, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual kind of adage or whatever. But like it's that thing where. For me, it's a quest, and I'm always growing. I think we should always be growing. And I think for a lot of people, not from any particular denomination or religion, but it is just a comfort zone.
Yeah.
And it's I'm taken care of. I'm when I die, I'm going to heaven. I don't between here and there, whatever. I don't have to think about anything. I don't have to take I don't have to have any accountability or. It turns into a crutch and a shortcut to thinking for a lot of people. And I've been saying that for a while about the whole social media, about how that's kind of, I don't think the world is a worse place than it was 10 years ago. I think that we're just seeing way more of the darker side of it, because that's kind of what gets popular and that's what gets spread around and that's what gets thrown in our face. And I think that's kind of what we're dealing with. So I just want to kind of agree with you on that point.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think it's important to note, that we all live in bubbles. Like it's not a conservative thing. It's a conservative, it's a progressive, it's a people in the middle. Echo chambers are awesome because echo chambers tell us that we're right, and that, they affirm our worldview. But yeah, no, I completely lost my train of thought on where I was going. That's embarrassing.
Rob has a tendency to do that to people.
And derail.
I was mystified by your brilliance, and it just makes me apart. And I totally forgot what I was going to say, and it was going to be amazing.
Well, let's talk about another one that just kind of sticks in my craw, and that's Ken Ham. I know you've blogged about Ken Ham, and we talked about this a few shows ago.
Ken Ham blogged about me too. So
did he really?
Yeah.
You'll have to tell me about that. But we talked about this where he now he's got that whole arc. Arc thing, okay, like the full scale replica, and and I'm cool with that, man. If you want to believe that, and you want to build that thing, but it was fun. It was also partially funded by the state of Kentucky.
Yes,
and that kind of that's where you kind of cross the line. But he's got this like diorama in it where he's working on this. I guess it's like a Colosseum picture where it's like giants, humans, and dinosaurs fighting each other. And then the best part of it is that he's also building this whole thing about the book of Genesis. And one of the things that he's building is the Tower of Babel. And I'm just thinking, does no one at Answers in Genesis get the irony in that? Do they not think that like they're
No.
building the Tower of Babel?
That is
Obviously, God didn't like that the first time.
Are they building like a model? Or are they doing like a
No,
whole
he's doing like a full scale replica, however that may be, of the Tower of Babel.
Where did he get the measurements from?
I don't know. I don't know.
It's said to the heavens, so I mean, I'll give him the clouds. That's at least 30,000 feet, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. Ken Ham is an interesting figure to me because, like, on one side of the coin, like he is completely ridiculous, and the things that he does are just hilarious. Like that diorama, like it looks like it's something that like some college student got bored and was maybe on drugs and made for, a history class as a joke, because it's like Gladiator meets Jurassic Park. And you're like, where did you come up with this?
Well, I think I know where you fall on the whole young Earth creation thing. But, that museum, and I've said this before, that museum reminds me more and more of the time machine ride at the beginning of Idiocracy. Okay, especially now when you add the dinosaurs in.
Well, and now that you have the fact that Idiocracy is real. And,
Yeah.
and we live in it.
See, I really want to go see the exhibit, but I don't want to pay and contribute because then I'd feel bad about myself.
No, I really want to go see it just because of morbid curiosity.
Right.
Yeah, he's so frustrating because like I said, there's the funny side of it, but then there's like the kind of serious side of it. I mean, there's the middle part where you're like, you can obviously throw biblical scholarship at him or scientific stuff, or, you can throw Augustine, who wrote a treatise in the 4th century on the literal meaning of Genesis, which is what it's called. And he essentially says, if you believe that the creation account in Genesis is a literal account of what happened, then you're an idiot. Like he uses slightly nicer language. I think he says you're a fool. But Christianity has not affirmed a literal creation, like as an orthodox position. There's certainly people who believed it, but like there are maybe a better way to put it. There are people in the Christian faith, great leaders of the faith, who have thought that Genesis was allegorical since the dawn of the Christian faith and before it, because it's a Jewish tradition to use allegory like that. And so there's those issues in the middle. But the thing that bothers me is to go back to something we were talking about earlier, is what he's done is not just look foolish and make Christians look silly. He's sanctified that anti-intellectualism and that anti-science position that we were talking about before.
Sure.
And so, as much as other people are to blame for Donald Trump, I mean, I think people like Ken Ham are profoundly to blame for not just Trumpism, but like the marriage of Christianity to the intellectual components of republicanism, is that he's sanctified with biblical language and Christianese, this idea that like Christians should doubt science and that Christians, shouldn't believe, what science tells us because the Bible is superior. And I mean, on the one hand, that's obviously a false dichotomy, but like on the other, like that's what opens up Christians to doing things that aren't just destructive to the environment and aren't just silly, but like are contrary to our faith. Because Genesis, which Ken Ham loves so much, comes with a pretty clear command from God that we're supposed to care for the earth, and it really helps if you're going to care for the earth to know how to care for the earth. And science does a really good job of telling us how to do that. And so like, as much as I think he is an endless source of amusement, because like you said, like he's constantly building ridiculous things and saying ridiculous things and doing ridiculous things. But like, he's also sanctifying people's anti-intellectualism. And that opens up the door to a whole host of problems that have become president of the United States.
Mic drop. It's just like people don't think about, this whole 6,000 year theory. Okay.
Yeah.
Now the latest thing, and I don't know if you've noticed this, I don't know how much time you spend on Facebook, but the latest thing now among a lot of these quote unquote fringe, Christian people is flat Earth.
I saw that. Did you see the NBA players that are really into this?
Oh, well,
Yeah,
no, today, Shaquille O'Neal.
We were just talking about that.
I
Yes.
saw that.
Yes. And Tila Tequila. But she goes to Nazi rallies too, so.
She's a nut job. Yeah, it's like, okay, so the part of me that wants to like try to wrap my mind around this says, you know, there are certainly community parts of the country, and I think it transcends racial demographics and goes more to socioeconomic demographics, but racial demographics are certainly part of it, that have been marginalized and exploited by the government, by science, that have, I mean, look at something like the Tuskegee experiments, right? Mm-hmm. Where you have the government infecting or making or exploiting, I guess I'm trying to think of a really harsh word, exploiting, but I mean, making servicemen of color sick for their own, you know, scientific experiment, or using, that's the way I put it, using people of color as scientific experiments. I mean, it's horrific. It's awful. And so like, if you're, the generous side of me wants to say, if you're coming out of that context where, like in the South, Tuskegee carries a lot of weight, you know, and so it creates a lot of doubt and suspicion of the government, and justifiably so. You know, I can wrap my head around that as maybe the cause of why you would also doubt your public education. But like Kyrie Irving went to Duke, who's, you know, one of the other basketball players who did this. He's not a dumb guy. Like, he's a smart guy. Yeah. And like the article in Yahoo said, you know, Shaq has flown to China. Like, what was Charles Lindbergh doing when he flew around the earth? You know, like, forget all the like science experiments. Like, you can take a boat out of Miami, where Shaquille O'Neal used to play basketball, and you could take that boat and sail it all the way around Africa, all the way around Asia, come back down. You could, you know, cut the way through and save some time and go through the Panama Canal and get back to Miami. Like, how would you do that if the earth was flat? And people do that. Like,
well, you see, we're on a dish, and in Antarctica is the big, like,
so you're really
sheet of ice.
You're really boating in a circle around the landmass in the center.
It's crazy.
On a turtle.
But I know what you mean, though. Like, there's been a few times I brought this up in conversation thinking it was going to be something kind of silly and funny to talk about. And the other person I was talking to was like, yeah, but did you know this? But check out this and look at this. And they were totally like,
oh, God.
Into it.
But like, well, that's what you see in like, you know, you can look at, like I said, I was trying to rationalize it with, you know, maybe Tuskegee, but like you see it with rich white guys too, you know, who deny climate change, you know, because, you know, they have their own reasons, or you see it in rural America denying, you know, fill in the blank, you know, evolution, you know, for example. It's just, I mean, like I said before, like it's an across the board, across socioeconomic lines, rich people, poor people, white people, you know, black people, you know, it's stupidity knows no bounds. That's what I'm trying to say. Like it's breathtaking.
Stupidity is equal opportunity.
Yes. Stupidity is an equal opportunity employer. I like that.
What did Ken Ham write about you?
Yeah, I've been curious.
So I wrote a blog post called, what did I call it? Oh, the Bible isn't perfect and it says so itself. Which obviously he would love, you know, so I was kind of surprised that he was upset about that. But it got a decent amount of traffic and stuck in a few people's crawl. And he and one of his cronies who wrote it, basically, like, he jumped all over, because I was at Yale at the time, and so he jumped all over that I was this crazy liberal at this godless university, and basically said that I was, you know, preaching heresy and leading people astray and wolf and sheep, like all the generic stuff. And, you know, was reassuring his people that, you know, the Bible is perfect and we can trust everything it says, blah, blah, blah. And never really engaged my argument at all, which I thought was somewhat decent. But yeah, just, you know, the typical Ken Ham stuff. You're a heretic and you're trying to lead the people of God astray. But yeah, it was a badge of honor. I was going to
say, did you take that as a sign that you're doing the right thing?
Absolutely. I need to print it out and frame it and hang it on my wall.
So where do you fall on that whole thing about creationism? And where do you fall on that?
Oh, I would be. I absolutely affirm evolution, but I also absolutely affirm the existence of God. And so, that is certainly hard for some people to reconcile, and I can see that. I think the problem comes, or what creates the problem rather, is how we understand God's activity in the universe, like how God acts and what it means to create. There's certainly nothing in the Christian tradition, and I see nothing in the Bible that precludes God from writing the laws of the universe.
Well, right. Sorry to cut in, but that's what I was going to say is, it's obviously we're living in a system. We see it playing out every day. This affects this, which affects this, outside of like a little divine intervention tweak here and there or something, the way I remember being a really little kid and my mom trying to explain some stuff from the Bible to me, and she always explained it very figuratively, like the whole Adam and Eve being created from mud. And she's like, well, science says that there was this primordial ooze, which is mud, and then there was bacteria, which evolved into this, into this, into this, and then eventually into man. So science says the same thing as the Bible. It's just a little different timeline.
Yeah, I think so. Like I was talking before, the Nazarene Church's position is that we affirm that God created. Like how you interpret that statement, how you believe that God created is totally fine with us. As a denomination, I have serious problems with creationism because it denies facts. So, intellectually, I have a problem with it. Mm-hmm. But and theologically, it is a twisting of Scripture. It's making the Bible do something that the Bible is not trying to do. Genesis 1-3 are not trying to say this is a word-by-word account of how God created, or a step-by-step scientific account of how God created. Like that is not what the writers of the Old Testament or the writers of Genesis were trying to do. Like they're trying to make a theological statement. They're trying to say that it is God who is behind everything. It is God who breathes life into the universe. They're not trying to say how God does that specifically, because if you follow the creation account, there's two creation accounts, one Genesis 1, one Genesis 2. They don't follow the same order. Light comes before stars, so I explain that one. And there's other things that should tip you off. Or one of my Old Testament professors at Yale said, he's like, what should really tip you off that this is a myth, although myths come with truth, but what should tip you off that this is, let's call it an allegory, call it whatever you want to call it, is the fact that when you get to Genesis chapter 4, there's a talking snake. And if you read a book anywhere else in creation at any point in time and there was a talking snake, you would say, oh, this is not supposed to be taken literally because it's a talking snake. And yet we ignore that in Genesis for whatever reason. But, it's twofold. I have intellectual problems with creationism. I have theological problems with creationism. But kind of to connect it to what we were talking about before with Pentecostalism and charismatic, I've got theological problems with some of that and intellectual problems with some of that. But if you believe in creationism, there's nothing about that prevents you from, clothing the naked and feeding the hungry and caring for the poor, And so at the end of the day, for me, if you're doing those things, if you're being Jesus, if you're loving your enemies and embodying Christ to your neighbors, if you want to believe in creationism, still don't do it.
Yeah, people want to spend so much energy debating it back and forth, and it's just like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
And guys like Ken Ham have built an empire on this stuff.
Yeah. Right. And like you said, it doesn't affect the overall message. So,
yeah, it definitely has tentacles and other things that I think are important. Like creation care, if you're debunking the science behind evolution, then you're unintentionally debunking science that undergirds a lot of our understanding of the climate. And so how do we know whether or not climate change is happening if we can't trust the science? And so when you open up that Pandora's box, there's a lot of problems. And so that's where I think there's serious issues, but I know a lot of good, godly men and women who have all kinds of wonky ideas, including myself, who has wonky ideas on things. and if you're still incarnating Jesus, according to Jesus, that's what matters, not, whether or not we had bad ideas about things. I mean,
there are people out there that will say that this allegory or this story is absolutely essential.
Absolutely.
Because that is the reason why Jesus came.
Or if you can't trust that story, how can we trust the Gospels?
Right. So it's like they take that and they say, well, but we have to have it as a whole. We can't have it just as this is fiction and this is not. I'm not saying that I believe that, but there are people out there that will say that.
You're absolutely right. And that is for them, that's the sort of nail in the coffin of believing evolution. And the problem is, it goes back to kind of what we were talking about before, of this black and white worldview. And everything has to be, clean cut and nice and neat. And so there's no nuance, brought to biblical interpretation when they take that position. And that's a broader problem. There's no nuance to a lot of the things that we do in our faith today, or the things that we believe, or the political positions that we take, or how we treat people. But the problem there is that you can absolutely affirm the truth of Genesis and absolutely affirm the truth of the Gospels and not believe in creationism, because again, the truth of Genesis is not a scientific process. The truth of Genesis is, in the beginning, God, and that God breathed life into man. And the truth of and it's expressed in a different way than the Gospels are expressing. The Gospels are concerned with a historical moment, because the Gospels are concerned with and the Word was made flesh, and God came and dwelt among us. And so, like, that claim, God became man, and I mean the incarnation is dependent on a historical reality, right? Like, we have to believe that's historical, because that's what that doctrine, that's what the whole salvation rests on, is that Jesus really existed, and that Jesus really lived, and that Jesus really died died on a cross, and Jesus really resurrected. And so, like, those truths come together. And I think the problem is and with people like Ken Ham, is they're being dishonest about how we read the Bible. And so they're flattening the diversity of Scripture. And so instead of saying, hey, we should read the Psalms differently than we should read Leviticus, because Leviticus is a list of laws and the Psalms are a list of poems, they're saying, no, we have to read it all the same way. And that's how they get this false dichotomy of, if we can't trust Genesis, we can't trust the resurrection account. And the reality is, we can trust both, and we can believe one is literal and one is metaphorical, because that's the way the writers intended it. Because sometimes people in the Bible write for literal things, like Paul in his letters, and sometimes people write metaphorically, like the Psalms.
There's a lot of authors in there. Yeah,
because it's poetry. And I mean, you have 66 books, but you've got dozen or more than 66 authors. I mean, in Genesis alone, like we're talking before about, I mentioned redaction criticism. So there's this thesis that the Pentateuch, Genesis through Deuteronomy, is actually written by I think 4 different sources. My friends are going to mock me now because I can't remember. J, D, E, and P, I think. Anyway, who cares? But it's a multitude of authors. It's not, Moses. It's several people. And then when you begin to look at it, like the Genesis account, you see 2 different creation stories, because there's 2 different people trying to make 2 different theological points. And again, it's the theological point that matters, not the historical thing. So, I mean, a lot of the problems that we face in the church today as Christians, I think, come down to our inability to read the Bible well and to read it faithfully. Because
Deuteronomy was written later, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, think about the story of Genesis. Who exactly was there to record the beginning? Or if Moses supposedly wrote the book of Deuteronomy, how did he write the chapter on his death?
Yes, that's what I was about to say. Yeah.
And again, to tie more into what we were talking about earlier, I mean, as a church, collectively, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, whatever, I mean, we've done a really bad job with discipleship. And people have really bad ideas about the faith. And the problem is that ideas lead to action. And so, a lot of us have been told that, all we need to do is go down to an altar and we're saved. And then if we need God's help, we can just pick a Bible up in isolation and figure it out for ourselves. And I mean, both of those ideas, while on the surface, like, don't sound that terrible or awful, have really serious consequences. And I think we're running into a lot of those consequences now.
That's where you get serpent seed theory. That's where that comes from.
What theory?
Serpent seed theory.
I don't know that. What is that?
The serpent seed theory is the idea that you had Cain and Abel, and Cain was the serpent's son, and Abel was the son of Adam.
Interesting. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. So Cain's lineage gives rise to the Nephilim, and so anyone that is descended from Cain, which somehow they got on the ark through Ham, I think, that they were a Nimrod, that they are not worthy of salvation because they are the descendants of the serpent.
Is that an attempt to avoid like the obvious incest, or is that?
I'm not sure, but it is an idea that is out there.
So like the real cynic in me wonders. There could be some really easy like racial connotations of that you could read into.
Yeah,
because
right.
There's certainly white supremacist movements who look at Cain and the mark of Cain and make that a racist statement. And if Cain came from a snake, then you've got your sanctified racism right there.
Yeah, that's what's dangerous about it. Exactly.
That's really interesting.
Yep. Well, Zach, it has been incredible, man. It's been enlightening.
Hey, thanks for having me. I had a blast. Anytime you guys want to do it again, just let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. And since you're here in Nashville, we need to try to get together.
Yeah, man. Just let me know. Like I said, I've got a pretty busy schedule, changing diapers and making bombs.
I gotcha. Tell everybody where they can get in touch with you, and I'd love to see a book come out at some point.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I thought I had one coming out a couple of years ago, and then believe it or not, that Ken Ham kerfuffle kind of threw a wrench in that. I'll have to tell you that story some other time. But I'm hoping for that too. But in the meantime, people can come to my blog at zackhunt.net. Don't go to zackhunt.com because it's owned by a fitness instructor in Spokane, Washington, who spells his name differently than me, but still owns my domain. So go to .net. You can follow me on Facebook. I've got a public page. It's facebook.com/ZackHunt, but Zack has 2 A's in it. And then also on Twitter, Instagram, my handles are also Zack Hunt, but Zack has 2 A's in it. You can follow me there and watch me rant on Twitter about Donald Trump or post pictures of barbecue on Instagram.
Well, excellent, Zack. Stay on the line for us. And guys, we're going to close this section out, and we'll be right back on Conspirinormal. So wow, that was good.
Yeah, I really like Zack.
Yeah. See, we're not all Bible thumping, Trump loving.
Right. Well, it's always interesting to hear somebody that's a devout Christian that echoes a lot of my own beliefs.
Right.
And throughout the episode, there's a lot of times where I was just like sitting here nodding my head, like, yeah. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Was there something particular that you really made you think?
A lot of the little little discrepancies and stuff, and how people are like, people want to take it so word for word, even though it's a 2,000-year-old book that's been translated a bunch of times and the context is different. It's relating to a different time period, and there's like well over 64 authors, like way more than that
books.
Probably.
Yeah.
And you have to take it for what it is. Like, I mean, it's fine to read it and say this is the foundation of our faith and stuff, but you've got to take it a step further. You've got to be willing to really kind of delve into it and think about it for yourself and come up with your own ideas. And like I said, religion, it should be a personal spiritual journey. There's, nobody out there, I don't think it's possible to read the Bible front to back and be like, okay, I got it. Like, I'm set, I understand everything. Like, it's just not how it works. So for there to be no wiggle room for some people, it just blows my mind.
And it's almost impossible to actually read it from front to back, right? Because you got the whole, like, Leviticus and
some of it's hard to get
those
through.
Really difficult books that are hard to get through. But, he kind of brought that up as a point. Yeah, I mean, perfect. What I've wanted to talk about, I think, for a long time, and we've talked about some of this with Dr. Future, and I'd love to get him and Dr. Future together. I honestly
that'd be amazing.
think that they have very much the same opinion.
You wouldn't have to talk that episode.
No, I would not.
You'd be a listener.
Definitely would not. I would just sit there. I would just ask the occasional question, and I would just be done, probably.
A little steering, and that's about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a difficult subject, man, when you talk about Christianity. I mean, it's a very sensitive thing. And people are, I'm sure there are going to be things that he talked about that people are going to listen to on this show. Because, we are on like Fringe Radio Network. And there's a good percentage of people, and that's a very Christian-based network. And there's going to be people that are going to listen to what Zack says, and they're going to have something to, they're going to have some objections to some of the things that he says.
And all of you should email us because we do want to hear about it.
Yes.
Don't flame us on Facebook. Just send us an email.
But I myself, and there's been quite a few people that look at something like the Genesis account and say that there's a lot more to it than what you're seeing. I look at it as kind of figurative or an allegory or those kind of things, but I also think there is a little bit of history there as well.
I do too, but the possibility that we're going to be able to sift through it at this point and figure out what is historically accurate and what is not it's the chances of being able to do that are slim to none. And even if you did, it's not going to discredit the message itself. Like Zack was saying, love your neighbor, be kind to each other, treat people the way you want to be treated, whether they're immigrants, whether they have different beliefs than you, whether they look different than you. It doesn't matter. That Jesus it was a message of love, and that's how it should be treated. Do
others as you would have them do unto you.
Yeah.
That's the very important message. And then other messages that are in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the meek. These are all things that are very important. And I don't hear this coming out of Trump's mouth. I don't hear this coming out of evangelical leaders' mouths. I don't,
it doesn't support the agenda. That's another thing I've been saying for a long time, like on the podcast. And it's just that it's been used for centuries. Religion has always been used, I think, by political leaders, as a way to control people. It's because and it goes back to what Zack was saying about it's a comfort thing. Like you want to feel comfortable, you want to feel accepted, you want to feel like you're going somewhere nicer after this. You better fall in line. Yeah. And that's a huge threat. It's a huge motivator, and that's why it gets used that way.
The point that he made about Christianities in the early age of the church, as opposed to Christianity, the plural. That's a good point, because there were different streams of thought in early Christianity. Nothing really gets put on paper to say this is what we believe until the Council of Nicaea. And that's around like the 320s AD. And the reason for that was because of the Emperor Constantine, who wanted to unite the Roman Empire under a single emperor under a single religion.
Right.
And he found, even though Constantine himself was not a quick Christian, and there's actually some debate on whether he was or not. He actually was baptized on his deathbed, but he actually worshipped like the sun god Sol Invictus. Okay. And that's why we have Sunday now as like the day that everybody goes to church. That's why we have Christmas on December 25th, because that was the feast day of Sol Invictus. Okay. So that's a borrowing. That was Christianity bringing itself in line with the Roman state.
Right. Which it did other times after that as well.
Mm-hmm. And Constantine said, okay, I need something. And Christianity was a good percentage of the population at the time. And he said, but I need Christians to come together and unite as well into these different, into some kind of cohesive unit and say, this is what we believe. And that's where you get the Nicene Creed. Well, that didn't exactly work, because there were Christians that disagreed with it. And you had all these different heresies like Arianism and all these different ideas that were around. Gnosticism was very important, although that was a little bit before Constantine. But my point about that is that religion, especially Christianity, was used by the Roman state to impose authority. And this is this whole idea from when Constantine is at the Battle of Milvian Bridge and he sees he's about to fight one of his rivals for control of Rome, and he sees in the sky this cross, or so the story goes, that says, "In this sign you will conquer." And he is commanded by an angel or somebody to put this sign on the shield, and it's a cross. It's called the Chi-Rho. Okay, and this has been a symbol that is the symbol of Christendom and not Christianity. It's a symbol of the power of the church as the Roman state declined and disintegrated. The church took that over. In fact, in the Eastern Empire, the emperor was still the head of the church. So yeah, you're right. The mixture of the church power, of church and the state together, is a very dangerous combination sometimes. And even in more modern times, like in Nazi Germany, with the the Nazis trying to get the churches to come into line, and the churches being most of the people in the churches being so for Hitler and for Germany, and not for Christ, and not for what they stood for, and the corruption that was there as well. Guys like Dietrich Bonhoeffer,
right?
The guys that spoke out against that.
It's like all the dogmatism sticks and all the morals just get dropped by the wayside. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And one point I wanted to make about the Genesis book, there's some interesting things in there if you ever read it. I mean, like, you have Adam and Eve, you have Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel, right? Mm. And Cain is sent out east of Eden, supposedly by himself, to the land of Nod, or whatever it's called, wherever that is. And God tells him, he puts the mark on him, right? And God tells him, no man, if any man shall see you, they shall kill you. And then they shall have the mark tenfold, or something like that. Well, if supposedly at this point there's only 3 people on earth.
Yeah.
Okay, that's in the Bible. That's God saying that in the Bible, right? And then then it says Cain took a wife. Okay? And a lot of people will say, well, it was his sister. It must have been his sister. But that's not in there. It doesn't say Cain took his sister. It just says Cain took a wife. So the implication is that there's other people that are around. And then he has a kid with this woman. And then what does Cain do? He builds a city. Well, if there's only like Adam and Eve somewhere out to the west, and then Cain and his wife and kid, why does he need to build a city? So the implication is that there's other people around.
Right. Well, and that's my whole point is like, especially in the Old Testament, these are stories that were, told by word of mouth for ages before they were written down. And they're just lessons. They're teachings. They're things to make you think about certain things, to make you, try to behave certain ways. And you got to look at what the reasoning and the morals behind the story is more important than the story itself.
Yep. Exactly. And there's another way to look at it too, because in the New Testament, you have these genealogies that, in Matthew, it goes from Adam to Jesus. And in Luke, it works backwards from Jesus to Adam. And like the genealogies are a little different in Luke, and some of the speculation there is that what's in Luke is actually the genealogy of Mary. But it runs through David, Solomon, the kings, back through, Joseph, Jacob, Isaac, Abraham, and then all the way to Adam. And so the idea there is that the story that we're actually getting in the book of Genesis is the story of this family, the story of this bloodline. And this is this bloodline that eventually leads to Christ. So
it's interesting how important that was to people, the bloodlines. And then we still have today with like the Dan Brown books and stuff, like the whole bloodline thing is still
the Holy Blood
matters
Holy
to some
Grail
people.
Stuff.
Yeah,
which I think is total crap.
I do too, but it's just interesting that people even care. Like it's like we need a monarchy. We need you to rule us.
Yeah, we need a monarchy is specifically descended from Jesus and just specifically descended from King David.
Well, it's like we have this draw to that guy.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it, guys. We're going to take about a 2-week break. I am moving, and next week, and then we will have on, I think his name is spelled Worcester, like the sauce, Jeff Worcester. He's probably, if he's listening, he's probably going to.
Oh, he just totally just cringed.
Yeah, probably. Worcester, something like that. But we're going to talk about the deep state with him. Ooh. And he has an organization called Center for Political Research. I'm really excited about that one. To get some time to talk about what's going on and maybe talk a little about the history of the deep state and all that. But Rob, before we go, tell everyone where they can sign up to be a Patreon or to make donations.
There's links on our website. It's www.conspirinormal.com. There's links to our Patreon account, which is www.patreon.com/conspirinormal. And there you can find bonus episodes. We're going to post some blog stuff. You can talk to other listeners, sort of a social link thing. And we want to give a little extra to people who feel like maybe it's helping support the show. Different tiers, you can sign up for $1 a month, $3 a month, $5, whatever you want. And there's different various packages that go along with that. Or if you don't want to be involved with something like that and you'd like to just do a one-time donation, you can do that through the website as well by clicking on the donate button. And if you don't feel like doing that and you just want to support the show, a great way to do that is with a nice 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yes, absolutely, guys. And thank you so much. And we're about to go on Charm the Water again. And I think we're going to be talking about some similar issues that we just talked about here with, I think, with Aaron and also with, I think, his friend Kelly, possibly.
Oh,
but
nice.
So guys, be looking for that in the 2 weeks that you don't have us. Check out Aaron's podcast. It's really good. And guys, thank you so much. And we will be back in about 2 weeks. Maybe with Luke. You never know.
Oh, definitely with Luke.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in a couple weeks on Conspirinormal.